The title of the session is Crime and Fiction, The World of Whodunnits. The speakers are Mr. Piyush and Mr. Masood Ashar. The moderator for today's session is Ms. Qaisra Shahraz. Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, Qaisra Shahraz is a prize-winning and critically acclaimed novelist and scriptwriter. Born in Pakistan, she has lived in Manchester since childhood and gained 2 master's degrees in English and European literature and in scriptwriting. Qaisra was recognized as one of 100 influential Pakistani women in Pakistan Power 100 list back in 2012. Her novels, The Holy Woman, Typhoon, and Revolt, have been translated into several languages, including Mandarin. The Holy Woman won the Golden Jubilee Award and has become a bestseller in Indonesia and Turkey. She has recently completed 2 volumes of short stories, A Pair of Jeans, and Train to Krakow. In her other career, she is a successful educationist and an interfaith and gender activist. Over to you, Qaisra.
Thank you. Okay, everybody, good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum and namaste and welcome to our Indian guest. Okay, I think the introductions have already been done. Thank you. So I hope you're in the right panel. This panel is about crime fiction. It will be conducted in English, and we only have 30 minutes, and there's a lot to talk about. We'll be talking about books, we'll be talking about the genre, and we'll talk about the film aspect, particularly with our guest from India, Piyush. So first thing I want to mention, really, when I was assigned to this panel, I was surprised. Oh, I thought, my God, I've not read much of crime fiction. I've not written crime fiction, so why am I moderating it? But then I began to research over the internet, and I realized, incidentally, I have read, which could be loosely labeled under the heading of crime fiction, because crime fiction is such a loose genre. For example, it includes detective fiction, whodunit, for example, courtroom drama, legal dramas, thrillers, etc. And one of the questions I'm going to ask my colleagues here is the books we might have read or enjoyed. But first of all, I will talk about the genre. What part does this genre play in our countries? For example, in England, where I live in Manchester, although I might not have picked up a book from the shelf to read a crime fiction, but we have sort of absorbed this genre incidentally, mainly through books, mainly through television series. In particular, we have Agatha Christie. So I'll talk about that later. So my question to my colleagues would be first to Piyush. What is it like in India? Is it a major popular genre as in the US or in UK, or is it sort of in its infancy stage? And I think he's got a lot to tell because in a way he has sort of started this genre. So Piyush, over to you.
Before I start, I'd like to say that this is my first time in Pakistan, and I'm having a great time, so thank you very much to everybody. Assalamu alaikum. Okay, so I'd like to tell you that the crime fiction genre that you're talking about has actually been there, like you mentioned. You had writers writing, at the turn of the century, Dostoevsky, or you had Edgar Allan Poe, and these are all crime fiction authors. And then you had Sherlock Holmes and the Agatha Christie's and all the other famous books and characters that were developed along the 60s and the 70s on the world. Unfortunately, in our subcontinent, what English crime fiction was not there for a long time. Although it's been there in the regional languages or in the indigenous languages, like Urdu mein Ibn Safi used to write, and in Hindi, of course, we have in India we have Peluda, Bengali fiction written by Satyajit Ray, etc. Unfortunately, English crime fiction was not existing, and now there has been a few writers, of which I am one, who started writing in English crime fiction. The Whodunnits being. And essentially, I just wanted to make a distinction that crime fiction, as understood by a lot of people, is about gangsters and terrorists. It's not so. Crime fiction in the world of whodunits is about a crime being committed most of the time it's a murder, and how it is to be solved. The person who has committed the murder has to be caught, and there's a detective or there's some kind of a crime solver trying to solve that crime. So that's what essentially crime fiction is. And now we have a few writers writing in English. I don't know how many writers are writing in Pakistan, but in India there are a few who have started writing, and we're doing pretty well. People have started picking up our books.
But would you agree it's a relatively new genre?
It is, like I said, in English it's a new genre. It has been around in Urdu, in Hindi, and in various other languages, Indian or subcontinental languages. I don't know about whether in Sri Lanka or Bangladesh they are writers, but I know that in India, apart from me, there are a few others writers who are writing about, so I guess a book a month is happening in India now. So it's let's say, a wave that is gathering momentum.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Masood Saab, what about the situation in Pakistan? In its infancy stage?
First of all, I would like to know the meaning of Piyush. It's a sound like a old Persian word.
Actually, it is Amrit. Amrit means
Amrit.
Amrit
I
in
see,
Hindi,
I see.
and which means the nectar of
Yes.
immortality.
Yes,
That
yes.
means you will be forever immortal if you partake of me.
Because of writing.
Maybe if you read my books too, yeah.
And what do you think about? There are some mysteries, detective novels, and crime fiction. Is there any difference between these genres?
Yeah, essentially, there is, like, for example, there is true crime, which is essentially putting together a case which happened, a true criminal case which happened, and what happened and how the person was caught, or if there is a courtroom proceeding that happened,
Yes.
happened, and the case, as it were, how it was solved. For example, in recent times, there has been a case in India called the Arushi murder case. I don't know
Yes,
if
yes.
people know about it. There's a film which has also been made on it called Talwar.
Okay.
So that's true crime. It is not crime fiction, because crime fiction is essentially fiction. So, but a crime fiction writer actually draws upon reality. So essentially, we are talking about what is happening in our world around us, because we are sort of commenting on the ills of society. Ultimately, a crime is an ill that affects the society. So when we kind of create a serial killer, for example, this is my book called Rakshas, India's #1 serial killer. It is kind of written with the idea that media has kind of created this need to be #1. So there is a serial killer who decides that I want to be #1. So everybody wants to be #1, and he wants to be the #1 serial killer.
All right.
Right. So it's drawing upon how reality television is making things so important for us to be achieving and be there #1. So yeah, it draws upon reality.
Can I get back to, say, books, for example? I incidentally entered the world of crime fiction, but I didn't realize it would fall under that category. For example, I don't know if anybody in the audience, have you heard of Daphne du Maurier Rebecca? Has anybody read? I read it when I was a teenager. I loved the book, but when I was researching about crime fiction, I realized, oh gosh, that fits into crime fiction as well. It's about a murder, it's about a mystery, and the characters sort of develop in such a way. And the other book I read, which I loved, and I think he's already mentioned it, I studied Russian literature, and one of my favorite authors is Dostoevsky, and Crime and Punishment is an amazing sort of book. Has anybody read Crime and Punishment? Yes? Okay, fantastic. So, I mean, it's just one of those kind of books. It's about a young man, an ex-student, who decides on a premeditated murder, and he does it for a moral reason. So really, it's a special kind of a story in a sense. It's about murder, it's about moral dilemmas, but it's also about the character how he's ridden by this, and it really hooks you in. And these are my sort of two books that I really enjoyed. The third one, which I read as part of my American literature, was an American author, Edgar Allan Poe. Anybody else read it? Again, put up your hands. And he is a master of suspense, mystery, and one of the earliest horror fiction writers. Has anybody read The Telltale Heart? Fantastic. I read it, I studied it, I actually also taught it with my students, and I actually used an audio tape, and to this day, the dialogue still rings in my ears. And there's a line here I want to read out to you. I've never forgotten it. It shows the power of the fiction, and it shows the fear. This is what he said: tear up the planks, hear, hear, it is the beating of his hideous heart. Do you remember that line, everyone? I've never forgotten it. But really, it's the power of the language I found. This is the question I'm going to ask next, my colleague. One, which book he's read prior to writing his own, which influenced him or which he enjoyed, but also what's the difference between ordinary kind of fiction writing and crime fiction. At the moment, let me show you, I'm plugging my good friend's book, Karen Slaughter. Have you heard of her? Anybody? You must. She's an American #1 bestseller, crime fiction, and I've just started it, incidentally. I didn't know I was doing this panel. And so far, it's a very good book on its own. But inside, obviously, it's about crime, it's about criminal. So really, my question to my colleague here, who is a crime fiction writer, is what dictates crime fiction, directs crime fiction, as opposed to a normal writing? Does that make sense?
Yeah, normal writing, I would say literary writing.
Or popular writing.
The
yes.
popular writing.
Both.
So, I would say literary writing or popular writing of other kinds rely a lot on characters.
Right.
But in crime fiction, there's another important thing which goes along with the character, and that's called plot.
Yeah.
If the plot doesn't satisfy the reader, it fails.
Right.
So, although character, as we know in any kind of story, character is extremely important, here the plot is as important.
Absolutely. Right.
So, crime fiction writers work a lot on plotting till they get it just right. Because
particularly with the whodunit, where they have to place the seeds of the plot, leaving clues and following them up.
You have to be one step ahead of the reader, because if the reader figures out, it's like, you've lost, you kind of lost the battle. So I look at crime fiction as I'm having a game, I'm playing a game with the reader.
Okay.
And I'm trying to win at all times. Right. And if I don't win, and I write what is essentially known as page turners, so I make sure that I write a page. At the end of the page, I make the reader turn to the next page.
Thank you for mentioning that, because the books I mentioned earlier, crime fiction, Crime and Punishment, The Telltale Heart, they were not produced as books. They were produced as installments.
They're serials.
They're serials. So obviously that, like Charles Dickens did, that dictated the fact you had to hook the reader onto the next installment. So presumably it's the same process. You are really hooking them.
It's absolutely that way, because so there's one essential difference in literary fiction and crime fiction, and that is literary fiction makes you think, crime fiction makes you sweat.
In what way? Tell me.
Yeah, well,
is it
that's
more
why I would like to.
Yes, please do that. Yes.
Why our highbrow critics, literary critics, don't think this crime fiction as a serious literature?
Yeah, absolutely beautiful and very important question you've asked. I ask this question all the time. And I suppose the answer is that it has a populist tone, and it sort of appeals to a wide readership. There is a lot of literary fiction, as pointed out, Dostoevsky or Edgar Allan Poe, but it
But
is
do-
just a
but they
question
didn't-
of standard time.
Crime and punishment, do you think is a crime thriller?
Yes, it's absolutely a crime fiction story.
But really,
It is absolutely
I don't
that.
Piyush,
Yeah, because
Listen.
we are viewing it through the prism of time.
right.
At that point of time, it was written as a popular novel. Even Shakespeare was written as popular. Today, we think of Shakespeare as high literature. So when viewed through a prism of time, everything changes. I think that my crime fiction viewed 100 years later would probably be seen as literary fiction.
I think I would disagree on the crime and punishment novel. I
Right.
don't think he wrote it as a crime fiction novel. He wrote it as a novel where the theme of murder, crime came in. But later,
Right.
now, 100 years later or so, they established into this genre. So I don't think he did it in that way. Whereas Sherlock Holmes,
And
you could say he
And
deliberately wrote those.
excuse me, what do you think about Agatha Christie's Mousetrap?
All of Agatha Christie is
They
essentially
are proper crime fiction.
crime fiction. Because you see what happened at the time when Dostoevsky and others were Poe were writing, the genre was not defined.
Yeah.
So although they were writing crime fiction, the label had not been
Yeah, yeah.
invented.
Yes,
So when the label was invented, everything went on that label.
absolutely.
So at that point of time, you can't say that they were not writing crime fiction because they were writing, but the label came later. So
Right.
by the time Agatha Christie came, the label was already there. So, and there were certain tenets which were already established, certain do's and don'ts, which of course Agatha Christie always flouted, but certain do's and don'ts exist. For example, if you show a gun in the first 10 pages, make sure it goes off at some point of time. In
Yeah.
the,
What's the point of showing it?
what's the point of showing a gun? If it's
Yes.
So that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You have to have your first 10 pages have to hook the reader into the rest of the book. Otherwise, you've lost the reader.
That's right. I think I'll go back to the labeling. As a writer myself, and we are writing in a very advanced world. We are writing in a world where marketing is very, very important. We are writing in a world where labeling is important. So really, when I research crime fiction, I realize it's such a loose, broad genre with many, many subgenres. So now, as part of the labeling, the packaging industry, people are pulling out these novels and labeling them to sell them. So really, this labeling game has been pushed by business, been pushed by money matters, but also by film. If Agatha Christie's film has come on, like Murder on the Orient,
Yeah.
there'll be a book there, people were on fire. So what is the situation like with your books? To go back to you, did you actually want to write a crime story, or did you accidentally stumble into it and then it went well and then you said, right, I'm going to complete this series, because you've got a series
Yeah.
there. Would you like to show them your
Well,
books,
yeah,
the
sure.
series, what they are? You mentioned one.
Yeah, so this was my first book, Mumbai Stan.
Mumbai Stan,
Yeah. So this is essentially 3 novellas, and this happened because I was actually writing a film script after my last film, Sikandar. I was working with a star, and I was developing a large film, and he went off to shoot a film in London for 3 months, and he told me that we'll discuss it when we come back. And I didn't have anything to do during those 3 months. So I started writing some stories. I didn't want to write another script.
Okay.
So I started writing stories. I wrote one, and my wife said, it's not bad. Write
Right.
another one.
Yeah.
So I wrote another one, and then I wrote another one, and we sent it out. And within 2 weeks, I got a 3-book deal
Yeah.
with a publisher.
So it's
who wanted-
it's
yeah.
great. That's great.
Yeah, so he wanted me to write. So I signed, but then suddenly I realized, my God, I signed. I have to write books now.
Yeah, yes, that's right, yes. So that
yeah.
dictated.
Yeah. So what happened is, by the time the star came back, I was writing books. So I
Okay.
couldn't do that film, and I
Absolutely.
got into writing books.
So
So
can
then I
I-
wrote these 3 novellas, and in which there was one novella called Injection Wala, which is a sort of a vigilante crime thriller,
Okay.
where there was an inspector called Inspector Virkar, which a lot of people liked. So it then developed into individual Inspector Virkar stories. So this came out then. became the Mumbai Stan series, an Inspector Virkar crime thriller.
Okay.
So he goes on his own adventure and solves a very intricate crime called the Compass Box Killer. And then came the next one called Antisocial Network, which is again an Inspector Virkar crime thriller. Then I decided I'm going to take a break from Inspector Virkar, and I wrote Rakshas, which is Rakshas, which means demon. Demon.
Right, yes.
And it's about the
Tell us
serial
about
killer.
it. What's the content of that?
So, well, in India, and I don't know, in Pakistan, I guess the same thing. People don't acknowledge that serial killers exist. You know.
Yes, yes, we have.
Yeah.
We have. Yes, yes.
Yeah. But there are just a few who have been acknowledged. But there are many more than there have been caught and labeled as of now. The police systems, let's say in India and perhaps the subcontinent, are not ready, geared up to kind of catch serial killers, because what it requires is a lot of mapping, a lot of following, a lot of sort of trying to understand forensics, because you need to see the same modus operandi of the killer across many killings and across over a long period of time. So we don't have that kind of thing in India, and as perhaps I assume that perhaps in Pakistan too we don't have that. And therefore I decided to write a book about a serial killer who exists among us, and I wanted to show how easy it is, to get away with crime and killings and exist as serial killers.
Can I ask you, in this book, for example, how important was the balancing act? Was it the character very important for you as well as the plot? Because those three, I mean, I'd like you to answer both questions. One is, this is a novel book on its own.
Right.
The other are series. So obviously because it's a series, that dictated who you have, what happens, it's connected with the next.
Right.
This one is different. So take us through that journey.
Yeah, so now here I was writing from the point of view of the antagonist, the serial killer,
Right.
So as in a crime fiction book, you normally have to end the story where there is a certain sense of justice which is delivered. The crime is all tied up, everything is tied up and it's solved. But I was writing from the point of view of the antagonist.
Right.
And
The antagonist.
So for me it was...
Is that normal?
It's not normal.
It's not normal?
It's not normal at all.
Okay, right.
So I had to kind of play the balancing role between the antagonist to my antagonist, who's actually the good side versus the evil.
Right,
so I had to play the in such a way that I had to balance it so that the reader understands both the sides and understands why the serial killer has become a serial killer. Because ultimately the serial killer is a product of the ills of our society. And perhaps if we understand that, we could perhaps...
So your idea
not
there
have
is
it.
to create empathy for
To
the
empathy.
But then...
And also, so it's a very fine balance that I had to strike, because I had to create empathy and hate.
Absolutely.
Because
yeah.
you cannot...
And hate.
And two for that same character. Because you have to understand him and
He's a
still
criminal.
dislike him.
Yes. Yeah.
But so it was a fine balance that I tried to strike, and I think from the reviews that I've gotten, that I
You
think
managed
people
to.
have sort of...
So he's still a criminal,
Yeah.
but also a rounded character. as
Yes,
such.
and justice is delivered.
And justice delivered.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's that novel. What about the other three? Is it plot driven? Is it? Is there one character who goes through all those three books?
And of course, there are other characters who keep coming in and going out. But it's, like I said, plot and character both have to be together.
Right.
For instance, any Sherlock Holmes or Miss Marple or Hercule Poirot, you like the character and then the plot too. And both have to work. So certain times if you find that the plot doesn't work but you like the character, so you'll still read it because you really like the character. But I'm starting out, so I have to make sure that both work really hard, and sort of connect together, in a manner that is entirely satisfying to the reader.
Okay. What about? Did you always want to write crime fiction? That's one question. Second one, to follow that up, is there must be a lot of research into this? Do you need to do research or for ideas or for reading others? Or, I mean, what is it like for you as a writer? I'm writing a novel at the moment set in Morocco. It's another world. I
Well-
have to research for it.
Well, you know what? Luckily, I sort of romanced the dark side in the early years of my youth. I was a student political leader, and you know, so a semi-gangster perhaps. Yeah. So I got a lot of on-ground training.
Right.
Yeah, and many of my friends who were with me in student politics are politicians, policemen, gangsters, etc. in Mumbai.
Right.
And so so I have a wealth of people that I can tap into to know about things. And in any case, I know a lot. On police procedure, I did a little bit of research, but otherwise, most of it is from my life.
Right.
Like Anton Chekhov said, everything I am, I learned from my own self.
Right.
You know, so it's,
Okay. Right, we'll talk about that in our second panel. Okay.
Right.
So, shall we move into the world of films then?
Yeah, but I think they are showing us a thing.
5 more minutes. Oh gosh, that time's very quick.
Perhaps you
Okay,
can put it
we
down.
do need time for questions, quick question, but before we quickly move on, film. Yes, question. Just 1 minute, okay? To the film, you're actually also doing crime fiction. So, what's the place of that in India at the moment? Is it lagging behind the mainstream Bollywood film?
Yeah, because
is it a new sort of genre
No, the
as a film?
crime film has been around for quite some time, but it's not really something which is a regular kind of industry,
Okay.
a part of the industry. Because in our subcontinent, I suppose romance. Family films really work, as like.
That's fine.
So the crime film keeps coming in, Gumnaam, Ittifaq, etc., right from the 50s and 60s, and we keep. Kahani was a
Right,
recent.
okay, I'll have to stop there. There was
yeah.
a question there. You're welcome to ask the question now. We've got 5 minutes, I'm sure, because of the short term
We can
session.
take 5 minutes more. It's all
Yeah,
right.
we can.
So everyone can hear me? Okay, so I have a question. As a fiction writer, the writer sometimes has to depart from the literary side of the fiction and move over to crime fiction to appeal to a larger number of audience, to appeal to the masses. So does it create a void inside the writer's creative sort of sense of plethora that he thinks that maybe I have to go back to literary writing once in a while? So you feel like you've sort of compromised your literary skills and you've gone to the popular side of the fiction, and sometimes you feel like, no, I've got to go back. It's too much of commercialism and populism.
In my case, there is no void and I have no problems. I have no literary pretensions. I tell stories, crime fiction
Yeah.
stories. I want people to read
Yeah.
my stories.
That is
I'm a storyteller.
Thank you. Okay.
There's a short story I read. I just quickly wanted to share that with you. Not the whole story, the gist of it. So it's a story by Alexander McCall Smith. And in there, the main character is
Mama Motswe.
it's a short story. That's
Oh, it's
the
a
whole
short story,
series,
okay.
Yeah. So the main character is at a literary festival like this, and he's sitting at a panel where they're discussing crime fiction like this, and he reacts. And he says that why must crime fiction always have a body and autopsies, and it's also gory? And the crime that we're affected with is very commonplace crime. Why don't people write about tax fraud and theft and robbery and mugging and things like that? And he says that I'm going to go and write a story about parking crime, when people sort of park in the wrong places, for instance. So he goes to the parking department, and they're delighted that someone's taking our work seriously, and they say that, yes, come along, we'll take you around with one of the parking officers, and you can write a story about the parking crime. So they go and they find that a car's been abandoned in a car park and no one's picked it up. And they open their boot, and of course, what do they find? A dead body.
That's true. I'm telling you, that's true.
So my
On
question is that
everything,
must good
think
crime
of,
have a dead
I
body?
think of murders being committed everywhere. So I go to a wedding, I think of, what if there was a murder committed out
We've
there?
got 2 more questions, yes, before we finish.
Well, this is Nasu Sumro. I'm also a writer myself. I would like to ask you, is it necessary in crime and fiction novels that a poetic justice must be, inserted.
Very, very nice question. I must tell you, I was asked this question when I was starting out. A very senior person, a writer and literary person, asked me that you're going to write crime fiction in India. Doesn't work because crimes actually never get solved. But every crime writer is writing because there is ultimately the reader gets a sense of catharsis, And in our case, it's more so because we don't see justice being delivered ever so often in real life. So when we immerse ourselves in crime fiction and justice is delivered, there is a sense of peace or catharsis or, a sense of balance that is created within us. And that is the essence of crime fiction. And let me tell you, my character I sort of developed in such a way that even though his aim is that justice has to be delivered, so he even bends the law to sometimes deliver justice, because the end goal is to deliver the justice.
Okay, one more question and we have to finish. The young man at the back, please. He's there. If you raise your hand. They can't, they tell you signal if they can't. They have to stop.
Hello everyone, I'm Atif. My question is about, you talked about being with those policemen and the politicians and the gangsters and hearing their stories, and obviously the crime which is being portrayed in the fiction, we kind of idolize it. We don't go to the ugly side of it, the reality of it, and only the people who have been through it, if you are taking it from a policeman or a politician or a gangster or from the point of view of a serial killer, only they know the reality. So how much do you hide it for the sake of readers so that you don't affect their psychology in a bad way, and what kind of toll it takes on you as being a writer, knowing about all this that's present in the society, the ugly side of it, the bad side of it, how does it affect you?
It's a very good question. Thank you for asking it. It's always important for a writer to understand how far can one go. I tend to believe that if I show, for example, if I show the bullet hitting that person and the person falling, if I show that or I write that and I create that, the imagery is much stronger in your mind. Instead of me describing the bullet going out there and blood spurting and the man's entrails coming out, etc. I think I trust my reader to kind of imagine much, based on my writing, and I'd like that to continue, with my readers, because I trust the reader to kind of, connect the dots. And I believe that that's the best way that you can do, because I think describing it in all its brutal warts and all kind of a form can be off-putting also.
Okay, thank you, Piyush. I have been given signal. We've gone over time.
Can we
have to
I think
but people can meet later. You can ask you later.
Can you? Sorry?
They have to.
Absolutely.
Anybody who wants to ask questions
Any more
further
questions?
can meet Piyush afterwards, after this panel.
All right.
Because we have another panel here.
Thank you very much for being here in large numbers.
Yes,
thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
We'd like to thank Mr. Piyush Shah, Mr. Masood Ashar, and Ms. Qaisra Shahraz for a wonderful session on crime and fiction. Please, everybody, give them a big round of applause.